The stench of formaldehyde, copper, and something else, something foul and indescribable, clung to me like a shroud. It was past midnight, and the hospital morgue was an echo chamber of my own panicked breathing. My flashlight beam danced across the cold, stainless steel gurneys, each one either empty or occupied by a sheet-draped figure. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drum against the silence. I wasn't supposed to be down here. Not after what happened. Not after she. A faint, scratching sound, barely audible over the rush of blood in my ears, emanated from the far corner. It was coming from the refrigeration units. My blood ran cold, colder than the air in this godforsaken place. Unit 7. It held the body of Mrs. Gable, an elderly woman who had passed peacefully in her sleep just hours ago, or so they said. I gripped the maglite tighter, my knuckles white. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to flee this tomb and never look back. But a morbid curiosity, a desperate need to understand, held me captive. The scratching intensified, a rhythmic scrape that sounded unnervingly like fingernails on metal. Hello? My voice was a choked whisper, barely my own. It cracked with fear. The scratching stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was even more terrifying. Then, a low, guttural moan, a sound that seemed to vibrate through the very concrete floor, filled the morgue. It was a sound I had heard before, but never from Unit 7. My mind reeled back to my first day at Street, Jude's, 6 months ago. The bright-eyed optimism of a fresh-faced intern, eager to contribute, even if my role was simply ushering the deceased to their final resting place. Mark, the grizzled veteran morgue attendant, had given me the grand tour. He was a man of few words, his face etched with years of witnessing death, but he had a kind of weary wisdom about him. "Rule number 1, kid," he'd said, his voice gruff as he gestured to the row of refrigeration units. "They're all just bodies in here. Nothing more, nothing less. Don't let your imagination get the better of you." I had laughed then, a nervous, youthful laugh. How naive I had been. The first few weeks were routine, if a bit grim. The quiet hum of the refrigerators, the sterile scent, the endless paperwork. My job was straightforward. Receive bodies, log them in, prepare them for autopsies, or transfer to funeral homes. It was a solitary existence, punctuated only by the occasional visit from a doctor or a grieving family member. Then came the whispers, soft, almost imperceptible sounds, like a sigh or a rustle of fabric, that seemed to emanate from the empty parts of the morgue. I dismissed them as old building noises, the settling of pipes, or the echoes of my own exhaustion. Mark, when I cautiously mentioned them, just grunted. "This place is old, kid. It's got its own creaks and groans." But they grew more frequent, more distinct. One night, I was organizing files when I heard what sounded unmistakably like a child giggling. I froze, every hair on my arm standing on end. We hadn't had a child's body in days. I scoured the morgue, flashlight in hand, finding nothing but shadows. The incidents escalated. Objects would be subtly moved. A pen I'd left on my desk would turn up on a gurney. A sheet covering a deceased person would be slightly askew, even though I distinctly remembered tucking it in tight. I started second-guessing myself, wondering if I was just overworked, sleep-deprived. Then Mrs. Gable arrived. She was a kindly-looking woman, even in death, a peaceful expression on her face, a life well lived, her family had said. No suspicious circumstances, just old age. I placed her in Unit 7, just like all the others. That night, the scratching began. Back in the present, the moan from Unit 7 faded, replaced by the ominous sound of something heavy dragging across the metal floor inside the unit. It sounded like a body being pulled. My breath hitched. Mrs. Gable was in there. Her body was in there. My hand trembled as I reached for the handle of Unit 7. Every fiber of my being screamed at me to stop, to turn and run. to pretend I hadn't heard anything. But the image of Mrs. Gable, peaceful in death, was now tainted by this horrifying knowledge. I had to see. I had to know. With a final, desperate surge of courage, I yanked open the heavy, refrigerated door. The blast of cold air hit me, bringing with it that sickeningly sweet, indescribable odor. My flashlight beam cut through the darkness of the unit. Empty. The gurney, where Mrs. Gable's body should have been, was bare. The sheet I had carefully draped over her was crumpled in a heap at the back of the unit, as if something had violently tossed it aside. And on the cold, stainless steel floor, etched into the condensation, were 3 distinct deep gouges, like fingernail marks. Long, desperate scrapes. My blood ran cold. My heart seized in my chest. This wasn't a hallucination. This wasn't my imagination. This was real. Suddenly, a whimper escaped my lips. I stumbled back, my eyes wide with terror, the flashlight beam shaking uncontrollably. The air in the morgue felt thick, oppressive. The whispers returned, louder now, forming a cacophony of hushed voices that seemed to swirl around me. She's awake. They never truly leave. One of us. I clamped my hands over my ears, squeezing my eyes shut, trying to block out the horrifying chorus. But it was no use. The voices were inside my head, echoing the very fears I had suppressed. I remembered Mark's words. They're all just bodies in here. But what if he was wrong? What if some of them weren't just bodies? What if some of them stayed? A cold, clammy sensation touched my neck. My eyes snapped open. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting a frantic arc through the darkness. Nothing, but the feeling lingered, a spectral touch that made my skin crawl. My gaze fell upon a stack of old files on a shelf near the entrance. Forgotten cases, cold files that had accumulated over the years. A sudden, irrational thought struck me. What if there was something in those files? Something that explained this. A desperate hope, a lifeline in a sea of terror, made me lurch towards them. My fingers, clumsy with fear, fumbled through the dusty folders. Autopsy reports, police statements, old photographs. My eyes scanned the names, the dates, the causes of death. Nothing seemed out of the ordinary, just the mundane tragedies of everyday life. Until I reached a folder, tucked away at the very bottom, a faded label barely legible. Unidentified female, case 1970, 2A. I pulled it out, my hands trembling. Inside, a grainy black and white photograph of a young woman stared back at me. Her eyes, even in the faded image, held a profound sadness. Her body had been found in the hospital's basement decades ago. Cause of death, undetermined. The report mentioned strange markings on her body, described vaguely as discoloration patterns that defied medical explanation, and a chilling note, scrawled in an old-fashioned hand. The whispers started after she arrived. A shiver ran down my spine. The connection, the horrifying pattern, began to form in my mind. This hospital, this morgue, wasn't just a place where the dead rested. It was a place where they lingered. Just then, a faint clang echoed from the far end of the morgue. I whipped my head around. The double doors leading to the main hospital corridor, which I had locked securely, were now slightly ajar. A sliver of light, almost like moonlight, seeped in from the hallway, and in that sliver of light, a fleeting shadow danced. A tall, slender figure. It was too much. The scratching, the voices, Mrs. Gable's disappearance, the old file, the shadow. My mind snapped. I dropped the folder, the papers scattering across the cold floor. I turned and ran, not caring where I was going, just needing to escape this nightmare. I burst through the doors, out into the dimly lit hospital corridor, gasping for breath. The sterile scent of antiseptic, usually so bland, now felt like a breath of fresh air after the oppressive reek of the morgue. I didn't stop running until I reached my car, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert it into the ignition. As I sped away from street, Jude's, the image of the empty Unit 7, the gouges on the floor, and the sad eyes of the woman in the photograph burned into my mind. I knew, with a horrifying certainty, that I could never go back. I had quit. Not just the job, but the very concept of being near death in that place. The morning light, when it finally arrived, offered no solace. The horror of that night was etched into my soul. I never told anyone the full story. Not really. They wouldn't believe me. They'd say I was sleep-deprived, that my imagination had run wild, but I knew the truth. And sometimes, even now, when the house is quiet and the wind whispers through the trees, I hear it, a faint scratching sound, almost imperceptible, and I wonder, just for a terrifying moment, if some of them truly do follow, if some of them never truly leave, and if Mrs. Gable ever found her peace. I often find myself looking over my shoulder, a chill running down my spine as I remember the chilling reality.